Every age believes it's different. Every generation thinks it has finally conquered time, that this is the moment when history stops repeating, when humanity transcends itself. But history never stops. It just changes costumes. We call it progress. We build faster machines, taller buildings, smarter algorithms. We celebrate every update as if evolution were a software patch. We believe the line of progress points upward forever because no one wants to imagine that it curves. We live in an age that mistakes motion for direction and growth for wisdom. Progress has become our religion and growth our God. We no longer kneel before idols of stone. We kneel before the symbol of more data, more wealth, more speed, more control. But more was never a destination. It's a treadmill. And the faster we run, the less we remember why we started. Once, progress meant survival. Fire, wheel, shelter. Each invention was born from necessity, not novelty. Humanity's first machines were tools. Today they are mirrors. We build technologies that amplify not just our strengths, but our flaws. And in those reflections, we confuse efficiency with enlightenment. Progress used to mean liberation, now it means dependency. We built tools to extend our reach, but now they reach back. We designed systems to serve us, but they decide for us. The moment our tools became invisible, they became our masters. The greatest trick of progress is that it always feels like improvement. Every empire that collapsed believed it was at its peak. Rome, at the height of its architecture, was already crumbling morally. Britain, at the height of its empire, was already exhausting its soul. And America, the empire of innovation, is drowning in abundance and starving for meaning. We believe we are better because we have more. But better and more have never meant the same thing. A faster world does not mean a wiser one. A connected world does not mean a united one. An informed world does not mean an enlightened one. We have confused the quantity of change with the quality of understanding. The ancients sought meaning. We seek metrics. We measure everything: GDP, bandwidth, engagement, everything except wisdom. We can count how many people are talking, but not how much they truly know. We can calculate how far data travels, but not how deep truth sinks. We are drowning in measurement and dying of meaninglessness. The illusion of progress is powerful because it feels tangible. You can touch the screen, you can swipe the future, you can measure your life in likes and megabytes. But real progress was never about speed or wealth. It was about consciousness, about seeing the world more clearly. Today, we see everything, but understand almost nothing. We've built machines that can simulate intelligence, but not wisdom. We've built networks that connect billions of minds, but isolate every soul. We've created systems that remember everything, but learn nothing. Progress is not evil, but it is amoral. It magnifies what already exists. And when what exists is confusion, progress multiplies it. When what exists is greed, progress accelerates it. When what exists is emptiness, progress expands it into infinity. We were told technology would make us free. But freedom requires choice, and choice requires thought. The new world doesn't need to control your body, and it only needs to distract your mind. You will never see the chains if they are made of pleasure. That is the perfection of control. When the prisoner builds his own cage. We invented machines to save time, but time only changed shape. We scroll faster, read quicker, move constantly, yet we never arrive anywhere. The average human spends more time looking at screens than at the sky. We have replaced wonder with data, reflection with reaction, and solitude with stimulation. We think progress is linear, that each generation builds upon the last. But evolution is not a straight line, it's a circle. Civilizations grow, peak, decay, and forget. Every collapse begins when a society confuses intelligence with wisdom and convenience with meaning. There is a paradox at the heart of progress. The moment it stops serving humanity, it begins consuming it. The wheel that once carried us forward now spins without purpose, and we call the noise it makes advancement. We invent not because we must, but because we can, and when invention loses necessity, it becomes addiction. The illusion of progress hides behind the language of optimism. We are told to believe in the future, to trust innovation, to move fast and break things. But what happens when the things we break are the very foundations that held us together? Family, community, purpose, truth. We celebrate every revolution of technology as liberation. But liberation from what? And toward what? The machine never asks that question. It just moves forward. And so do we, even when the road is gone. Progress is not a ladder. It's a mirror. It shows us who we are, not who we wish to be. And right now, the reflection is uncomfortable. A civilization obsessed with efficiency but allergic to meaning, A humanity more connected than ever, yet more divided than before. A world that can predict storms but not compassion, that can map galaxies but not the human heart. Maybe that holds the truth about progress. It doesn't defail us, we fail it. Because progress without wisdom is not evolution, it's acceleration toward nowhere. And we are already running out of road. Progress was supposed to serve humanity, but somewhere along the way, humanity began to serve progress. We stopped asking, does it help? And started asking, is it new? And in that subtle change, the direction of civilization inverted. We built an economy that doesn't know how to stop, a culture that cannot rest, a psychology that confuses stillness with failure. The system we created now feeds on the very souls that built it. It is not run by kings or priests anymore. It is run by metrics, by growth charts, engagement graphs, quarterly reports, the sacred texts of the new religion. And this new god called more does not sleep. Every second must be productive. Every idea must be monetized. Every breath must yield a number. The machine doesn't care what it produces, only that it never pauses. We call this progress because it feels like momentum. But momentum without direction is chaos in disguise. It feels powerful because it's loud. It feels alive because it's constant. But a hurricane spins too and destroys everything in its path. Human civilization has become addicted to acceleration. We worship speed as if velocity were virtue. We measure intelligence by output, not insight. We've built a machine that can make anything except meaning. When everything becomes possible, nothing feels significant. The infinite choice kills curiosity. The endless supply erases desire. We are not starving for food or tools. We are starving for purpose. The machine of more is invisible because it hides inside our desires. It doesn't command us, it seduces us. It whispers, you can be more, do more, have more. You just need one more click. It promises abundance but delivers exhaustion. We call it innovation, but it's repetition disguised as progress. Every new app, every new platform, every new version, a slightly different cage painted in new colors. The danger is not that the machine controls us, but that it has learned to speak our language. It doesn't need force, it needs habit. It doesn't need obedience, and it needs attention. And attention is the new currency of control. We used to sell labor, now we sell focus. We used to mine coal, now we mine minds. Every scroll, every notification, every dopamine rush, another coin fed into the machine. The irony is brutal. The more advanced our civilization becomes, the less human it feels. We've mechanized emotion, automated creativity, and outsourced curiosity to algorithms. The line between progress and possession is gone. We are no longer users, we are the used. Once, technology was a bridge between human potential and human need. Now it's a moat, separating us from the world it promised to connect. We stare at screens that show us everything and teach us nothing. We touch glass instead of grass. We communicate constantly but rarely connect. We mistake activity for growth, movement for meaning, connection for intimacy. We mistake the noise of the machine for the heartbeat of humanity. And when silence finally arrives, it feels unbearable, because silence reminds us we are not machines. The machine of more thrives on insecurity. It tells us we are never enough, that we could be richer, smarter, thinner, happier, if only we kept running. So we run, and we call it life. I'd say we upgrade, optimize, update, consume, but each improvement only raises the standard of dissatisfaction. The moment we adapt to one level of comfort, the next becomes necessity. And soon, we are not chasing progress. We are escaping inadequacy. 1 billion people scrolling endlessly, right? Not because they want more, but because they fear stopping. Because stopping feels like failure. Because stillness feels like death. That is not progress. That is captivity disguised as choice. The machine of more has no enemy. It doesn't care if you rebel as long as you react. It feeds equally on praise and outrage, on hope and despair. What matters is motion, attention, energy. It is not powered by electricity. It is powered by emotion. And that's the cruelest part, because emotion is what makes us human. But in the hands of the machine, it becomes fuel. Every outrage becomes monetized. Every tragedy becomes content. Every human story becomes data. The more we express, the less we feel. The more we connect, the less we know. We have made ourselves infinite, but empty. Civilization has built its own nervous system, but forgotten its soul. Every impulse travels instantly across the globe, but nothing travels inward. Progress, once a journey toward truth, has become a sprint away from silence. We cannot hear ourselves anymore. We've confused echo for dialogue and reflection for relevance. The machine speaks louder than thought itself. And thought, like all fragile things, begins to die in the noise. But maybe progress was never the problem. Maybe the problem was our definition of it. Because progress without reflection isn't advancement. its acceleration into blindness, and blindness can only end one way. The machine will keep moving until something breaks, and when it does, the silence will return. And in that silence, we will finally hear what we've been running from. Progress gave us comfort. But comfort, like pride, is a slow poison. It begins as a reward and ends as a drug. The first fire warmed our ancestors. The last one will make us forget what cold ever felt like. Because when everything becomes easy, nothing feels valuable. And when nothing feels valuable, civilization begins to rot from the inside out. Comfort doesn't destroy empires, it sedates them. It replaces danger with distraction and purpose with pleasure. The great decline of any civilization never begins in its streets. It begins on its couches. Comfort teaches the mind to avoid discomfort. And discomfort is the only thing that ever made humanity grow. Pain was the teacher, hunger was the motivation, struggle was the architect of greatness, and now we've fired them all. The modern empire has conquered every external enemy, but it's losing the war within. Our greatest threat is not invasion, it's inertia. Not poverty, but the wealth that numbs us. Not oppression, but the illusion of freedom without meaning. We are surrounded by abundance, and yet we live as if we lack something. Because the more comfort surrounds us, the more restless we become. The body rests, but the soul suffocates. The brain adapts to pleasure like a drug. And the higher the dose, the lower the reward. That is the paradox of progress, amour et force. The more it gives, the less we feel. Comfort is seductive because it looks like peace. No wars, no hunger, no struggle, only convenience. But peace without purpose is not life. It is hibernation with Wi-Fi. And hibernation always ends the same way, weak and unprepared for the next storm. A comfortable civilization loses its immune system. It cannot handle hardship because it never practices it. When the next crisis comes, people don't rise, they collapse. They don't fight. They panic. They don't endure. They escape. They scroll. They cope. They wait for someone else to fix it. Comfort makes dependence feel like progress. The more things do for us, the less we remember how to do anything. The algorithm chooses our music, our news, our lovers, our opinions. We no longer live, we are lived through. By systems we no longer understand, and by conveniences we no longer question. A culture built on comfort stops asking why. It only asks how fast. It optimizes every process but never questions the purpose of the process itself. We call that progress. But it's just automation of apathy. The philosopher becomes an influencer. The scientist becomes a brand. The artist becomes a content creator. And creation, which was once rebellion, becomes routine. Comfort rewards conformity because conformity is predictable, and predictability keeps the machine stable. The moment someone questions the rhythm, they're called negative. The moment someone resists, they're called dangerous. The empire begins to protect its comfort like a sacred truth. But truth never grows in comfort. When comfort becomes the highest value, sacrifice disappears. Why risk when you can rest? Why struggle when you can scroll? Why build when you can buy? Every invention that promised to free us has only made us softer and slower. Once, humanity fought to survive. Now it fights to stay entertained. The Colosseum has returned, just smaller. It fits in your hand. Every swipe is a show, every feed is a stage, and every citizen is a spectator applauding their own distraction. The empire no longer needs to suppress rebellion. It simply drowns it in entertainment. You don't have to silence the people when you can keep them comfortable. Comfort changes morality too. Once good meant courageous. Now good means convenient. Virtue is no longer measured by sacrifice, but by how easy it feels. We avoid pain like it's evil. But pain was the birthplace of everything noble. Every breakthrough in history came from discomfort. Every revolution began with hunger. Every masterpiece began with doubt. Take those away, and you remove the source of human greatness. A comfortable world cannot produce greatness because greatness grows in friction. And friction has become offensive. Look closely and you'll see it everywhere. Politics without courage. Art without emotion. Love without depth. Faith without commitment. We have replaced the substance of life with simulations of it. And the tragedy is, the simulation feels good. It feels safe. It feels enough. But it is not life. It is anesthesia. We no longer fear death because we never truly live. We no longer dream because dreams require hunger. We no longer believe because belief requires risk. And when a civilization stops believing in anything greater than its own comfort, it begins to decay beautifully, quietly, elegantly, without pain. That is how progress becomes paralysis. Every empire eventually mistakes comfort for stability, And that is when it falls, because stability is not safety, it is stagnation disguised as peace. Life is movement, history is struggle, growth is conflict. Remove those, and you remove the heartbeat of civilization. The cost of comfort is not paid in gold or time. It is paid in courage, in imagination, in the will to change. Comfort steals those first, long before the empire collapses. Progress promised us paradise, and in a way it delivered. A paradise of screens, of convenience, of noise. A world so frictionless it slips through our fingers. A life so easy it's impossible to feel alive. We have conquered hunger and disease, but not emptiness. We have built the perfect shelter, but no longer have storms to test its strength. We have achieved peace, but lost purpose. That is the cost of comfort. Not pain, but numbness. Not collapse, but sedation. Civilizations don't die screaming. They die asleep. Every civilization has an addiction. Ours is growth. We don't just grow, Simud. We must grow, because if we stop, we think we die. The modern world is built on one equation. More is good, more profit, more progress, more production, more people. We've turned expansion into morality and limits into sin. We speak of sustainability while designing systems that cannot sustain stillness. The machine must move even when it's moving toward the edge. We call it the economy, as if it were a force of nature. But it is not nature. It's an invention. And every invention is also a reflection. Ours reflects our hunger. Endless, restless, sacred hunger. We don't know what enough feels like anymore, because enough is the one word that breaks the spell of growth. Growth was once survival, now it's identity. Without growth, the empire feels like it's dying, because it no longer knows how to be alive without consuming. We consume the planet, we consume each other, we consume meaning itself, and we call it development. Progress promised liberation, but the cost was addiction. Addiction to speed, to novelty, to expansion without purpose. And the more we achieve, the more fragile we become, because nothing that grows forever survives, not in nature, not in history, not in the human heart. The forest that never burns becomes too dense to live. The river that never slows floods its own banks. The empire that never rests collapses under its own weight. But we cannot stop, because stopping feels like regression. And regression is the new apocalypse. Growth has become our compass, even when it points nowhere. We chase graphs upward without asking what they mean. We measure progress in numbers, not in understanding. We say the economy grew as if the soul did too. But a tree that grows without balance becomes hollow inside. And a civilization that grows without meaning becomes empty at its core. The addiction to growth is not just economic, it's psychological. The brain itself adapts to progress like a stimulant. Each new invention gives us a high, each new update gives us a hit, and when the high fades, we panic. So we reach for the next one. We mistake the rush of change for the feeling of purpose, and the crash that follows for the cost of living. We've become a species of addicts, addicted to movement, novelty, and the illusion of control. But growth without direction is not evolution. It's noise. It's the sound of a system too scared to listen to its own silence. Every empire that ever collapsed did so because it outgrew itself. Rome overextended its reach. Britain exhausted its empire. America expanded into everything until there was nowhere left to go. When the outside world is conquered, the empire turns inward and devours itself. That is where we are now. The markets have no frontier left. The algorithms have no new data to consume. The culture has no new ideas to sell. So it begins recycling itself. The same trends, the same debates, the same outrage over and over again, not because it wants to, but because it cannot imagine stillness. That is not vitality. That is withdrawal. Growth once meant discovery. Now it means distraction. We grow our technology but shrink our attention. We expand our reach but lose our grip. We multiply our options but erase our direction. And through it all, we whisper to ourselves that this is progress, because it moves. A civilization addicted to growth cannot measure success in wisdom or happiness. Those things do not scale. So it measures wealth, influence, and engagement instead. And what it cannot count, it stops caring about. That's why truth doesn't matter anymore. It doesn't scale. Integrity doesn't trend. Wisdom doesn't monetize. The algorithm of growth deletes anything that slows it down. And the tragedy is, it works. It makes us richer, faster, louder, emptier. It builds towers that touch the sky and hearts that touch nothing. Growth turns art into content, science into business, education into product. It sells the illusion of purpose through the promise of more. More followers, more metrics, more reach. And when all else fails, more outrage. We live in an empire that mistakes expansion for evolution, that rewards excess and punishes restraint, that calls endless consumption freedom. But freedom without wisdom is just indulgence. No one notices when growth becomes cancer, when creation turns parasitic, when the system grows for its own sake. Because by then, it's too beautiful to question. The skyscrapers glow, the markets rise, the screens shine. And beneath all that light, the human spirit dims. Every civilization reaches this moment when it must decide whether to keep growing or start maturing. One is easy, the other is painful. One is survival, the other is transcendence. But addiction has no patience for wisdom. It fears reflection because reflection slows it down. So the empire keeps building, faster, bigger, louder, until the noise becomes unbearable and collapse begins to sound like relief. That is the secret longing of every civilization at its peak. Not fear of falling, but exhaustion from standing too tall for too long, because growth is a burden too, and the higher we climb, the thinner the air becomes. The empire begins to choke on its own success. The addiction to growth ends the same way every addiction does. Not in tragedy, but in surrender. When the high no longer works. When the next hit feels empty. When the silence becomes unavoidable. And then, for the first time in centuries, civilization stops. Not because it wants to, because it has to. And in that moment of collapse, something ancient stirs again. A question buried under centuries of noise: what if progress was never about more? What if it was about becoming enough? When growth becomes endless, meaning becomes impossible. Because meaning requires boundaries, it needs contrast. A sense of enough, a moment of stillness, a reason to stop. Without limits, even light loses shape. And that is what we've done to the world. We've flooded it with so much brightness that we can no longer see. Meaning is born from struggle. It's carved out of suffering, earned through patience, clarified by reflection. But our civilization has declared war on all three. We've replaced struggle with convenience, patience with immediacy, reflection with reaction. And now we wonder why nothing feels real. The collapse of meaning doesn't arrive with fire, it arrives with noise. Too many voices, too many choices, too much information, and no silence left to understand any of it. Truth drowns not because it's hidden, but because it's buried under everything else. We used to ask, is it true? Now we ask, is it trending? And when every opinion is amplified equally, meaning becomes just another commodity. Reality turns into a market, and truth, like everything else, becomes a product sold to whoever pays attention. Attention is the new currency, and it devalues meaning like inflation. The more we produce, the less it's worth. Every word, every image, every cause, every outrage, and then another drop in an ocean that no one can drink from. We live in an empire of noise where silence is rebellion and reflection feels like betrayal. Meaning once came from depth, now it comes from visibility. We measure the value of an idea by its reach, not its truth. We call it communication, but it's performance. We speak not to understand, but to be seen. And when everyone performs, no one listens. In the age of progress, we have democratized the stage and destroyed the audience. Everyone talks, no one hears. Everyone knows, no one understands. Everyone feels, but nothing lasts. We scroll through centuries of wisdom and remember none of it, because the act of scrolling itself has become the new thinking, an endless flicker of half-thoughts and instant emotions. It looks alive, but it's hollow. It moves, but it never arrives, meaning dies slowly, one substitution at a time. We replace curiosity with certainty, wisdom with opinion, faith with self-expression, and when everything becomes about the self becomes unbearable. We tell ourselves we are freer than ever, but freedom without purpose feels like falling without ground. We tell ourselves we are more connected than ever, but connection without depth is just noise wearing empathy-esque mask. We tell ourselves we are more informed than ever, but knowledge without wisdom is just data pretending to matter. The collapse of meaning is not an explosion, it's erosion. Every shortcut, every distraction, every convenience, a grain of sand falling from the foundation of consciousness. Until one day, the structure still stands, but there's nothing inside it anymore. Look at our cities, monuments of glass and steel, glowing all night, desperate to look alive. Look at our culture, loud, fast, bright, but terrified of silence. Look at our minds, filled to the brim with everything, but empty of peace. We have replaced the sacred with the spectacular. We used to kneel before gods. Now we kneel before algorithms. We used to pray for meaning. Now we refresh for it. The collapse of meaning is not just philosophical. It's emotional. You can feel it when you wake up and everything works, but nothing matters. You can feel it when you achieve everything you were told to want, and the reward feels like static. That emptiness is not failure, it's the echo of something human that progress forgot. When meaning collapses, morality follows. Right and wrong blur into preference. We no longer believe in truth, we believe in engagement. The more provocative, the more profitable. The more divisive, the more visible. And so, civilization begins to reward conflict, because peace doesn't sell. We call it culture. But it's commerce wearing culture's clothes. Even rebellion has become a brand. Even outrage has a sponsor. Every idea has an influencer attached. And the truth, stripped of glamour, fades quietly into the background unmonetized, unclicked, unseen. Meaning used to be something we discovered. Now it's something we design. And like all designs, it eventually feels fake. The tragedy of our age is not that we lost meaning. It is that we replaced it with stimulation. And stimulation doesn't satisfy. It only numbs. It keeps the emptiness quiet long enough for us to mistake silence for peace. But the mind knows. It knows when it's being distracted instead of nourished. It knows when purpose has been replaced by performance. It knows when truth has been traded for validation, and it grows restless on the same restlessness that precedes every collapse. When a civilization loses meaning, it doesn't die instantly. It drifts. It keeps walking, talking, producing, pretending, until the movement itself becomes meaningless. And that is the final illusion, that survival is the same as life. The collapse of meaning is not the end, it's the revelation. Because when everything shallow falls away, the human spirit begins to remember what depth felt like. It begins to crave again, not for more, but for real. Every age of emptiness gives birth to a generation of seekers. When the noise becomes unbearable, silence becomes sacred again. When the spectacle fades, truth regains its shape. When comfort collapses, courage returns. Meaning is not gone. It's waiting. Beneath the noise, beneath the speed, beneath the screens, it waits in the stillness we've been taught to fear. And one day, when the empire of noise finally collapses under its own weight, we will hear it again. Every collapse carries a message. It whispers from the ruins beneath the dust of what once was great. You forgot what mattered. The fall of empires is never the end. It's a cleansing. A moment when noise dies and silence finally speaks. And in that silence, humanity begins to remember itself. We believed progress was movement, but movement without meaning is just noise. We believed growth was life, but growth without wisdom is just swelling before the wound. We believed innovation was destiny, but innovation without purpose is just escape in disguise. Now the machine has slowed. The empire breathes heavier, the light flickers, and for the first time in centuries we can hear again. Wisdom is not new, it's ancient. Buried under layers of progress we mistook for truth. It waits in the same places we stopped looking. In silence, in patience, in humility. Every civilization at its peak believes it has transcended the past. But wisdom does not evolve, it returns. It's the same voice that spoke through prophets, poets, philosophers. It's the voice that said, balance is not weakness, limits are not loss, and stillness is not death. It's the voice we silenced because it slowed us down. Progress taught us how to build. Wisdom teaches us when to stop. Progress expands knowledge. Wisdom expands understanding. Progress conquers nature. Wisdom learns from it. Without both, humanity is half blind, brilliant but broken. When meaning collapses, the soul begins to hunger again. And hunger is how life starts over. We begin to crave things the machine cannot give. Quiet, connection, authenticity, awe. We begin to rediscover the sacred. Not in temples, but in awareness. Not in control, but in care. Not in more, but in enough. The return to wisdom doesn't happen in palaces or parliaments. It happens in people, one awakening at a time. A single human who stops running, who turns off the noise, who dares to feel again. That's how civilizations are reborn, not by invention, but by remembrance. We do not need new truths. We need old ones, remembered clearly. The truth that everything alive requires balance. The truth that strength without compassion becomes cruelty. The truth that knowledge without humility becomes madness. And the truth that no civilization can rise higher than the character of its people. The next age will not be built by engineers. It will be built by listeners, by those who can stand still long enough to hear what the world is saying. Because the earth is speaking, always has been. It warns in drought, in storm, in silence. And wisdom is learning to listen before it screams. Progress looked outward. Wisdom looks inward. Progress built monuments. Wisdom builds meaning. Progress was loud. Wisdom whispers. And that whisper is returning, softly, patiently, through the cracks of the collapsing age. History is not a line, it's a circle, and every end is a mirror of its beginning. We began as wanderers, seekers, storytellers. We looked at the stars and asked why, not how much, and perhaps after all this noise, all this progress, all this collapse, we are finally ready to ask why again. The return to wisdom is not about rejecting technology or comfort, it's about remembering their purpose. Tools are not gods, convenience is not virtue, speed is not salvation, they are servants, and only wisdom can command them. The world doesn't need another empire, it needs balance. A civilization that grows but not endlessly, that builds but not blindly, that questions itself as much as it celebrates itself, that can sit in silence without fear. When progress and wisdom walk together, humanity evolves. When they part, it collapses, and we have walked apart for too long. Now the cycle turns again. The old world is fading, the new one waits, not ahead but beneath, waiting to be uncovered, not invented, waiting to be remembered, not announced. It will not begin with conquest or code, it will begin with a whisper. Enough. Enough noise. Enough speed. Enough pretending that more is meaning. The future begins when we stop running from stillness. Because in stillness, life returns. Wisdom is not the end of progress. It's its purpose. The circle closes not in destruction, but in understanding. And from that understanding, something new begins. Not faster, not louder, not greater, just truer. The myth of progress was never about machines. It was about memory. And memory, once recovered, becomes prophecy. Perhaps that's what collapse really is. Not punishment, but correction. Not failure, but invitation. A return to the truth we left behind, that humanity's highest achievement was never invention. It was awareness. And when awareness returns, so does everything worth calling progress.